Hey everyone, in this video, I want to cover the App Gateway Network Isolation update. You can think of this as an update to the original deep dive on App Gateway I released about 4 years ago, which is still current. It's just now there are a couple of additional capabilities. Now, as always, a quick refresher. So remember, App Gateway provides a layer 7 load balancing solution. So I can think that I have my App Gateway, and it gets deployed within a specific region, within a specific virtual network, into a dedicated subnet. So if that's my app gateway, it is deployed into a subnet that is exclusive for the app gateway. And obviously that subnet has to live in a certain virtual network. The VNet is bound by subscription and by region, so the app gateway exists within a specific region. Now, it is a layer 7 solution. So when I think about layer 7, that means it understands things like HTTP or HTTPS. It understands HTTP2. It understands WebSockets. So it has a rich understanding of those layer 7 protocols. So I can do URL-based redirection. I can do rewrites. It does TLS termination, which lets me look at the full URL. I can do session or cookie-based affinity and a lot more. And it can front, i.e. act as that gateway, that load balancing solution for layer 7 to anything it has an IP path to. So I can think about, well, as long as I can get to a VM, an app service, or any IP for that matter, or resolve a fully qualified domain name, then I confront it with this. So this could be things in the same virtual network. This could be things in peered virtual networks. It could be things over a site-site VPN, ExpressRoute private peering. It doesn't care. Now, as we talk about this new network isolation capability, we are very much focusing on the V2 version of App Gateway. If you are still using the V1 version, it is deprecated. You should be getting off of it. There is a migration script, actually, if I jump over super quickly, and I'll link this in the description below. This is how you can migrate off of that V1 to a V2. So you would want to go ahead and use this script. So everything we're going to talk about is specific to the V2 version. Now, I mentioned the idea that it can front traffic for all of these. If there's an IP path to the thing, it can get to it. So what do those front end look like? So when I think about the front end configuration with the V2, it always has a public IP. So I would have a public IP that clients could go and talk to. And then optionally, I could have a private IP. This private IP is taken from the subnet you install the App Gateway V2 into. Now also, if you wanted to, you can have private link support. So I could absolutely have a private endpoint in a completely different VNet. So I've got some VNet 2 that I don't peer, so I don't use the regular kind of routing mechanisms. Maybe they've got the same overlapping IP spaces, so I use private endpoint. So private endpoints are supported over there as well. Now, there are ways to minimize the use of this public IP. Maybe my requirements were, hey, really, I just want to use this private IP. I don't want the public IP address used, but it was still required. If you were to go and look at the network security group rules, we see that there's gateway manager traffic required. If I jump over, I can see no matter what I do, I have to have this source of gateway manager allowed. And it talks about sort of sets of ports that are required to support that. And the reason for this is the original V2, what we're talking about here, utilizes the same public endpoint that serves my client traffic coming in for the Azure control plane traffic. So obviously Azure has the Azure Resource Manager. This is the management, the control plane of Azure. When I create an Azure resource, when I modify a resource, well, the control plane works with the resource providers and the resource instances to create the instance, configure the instance, do various things. And so when I think about that together, we have this idea, I'll do this color, we have the Azure control plane, or ARM. So the Azure control plane is using that same public endpoint that the client traffic uses, which is why we couldn't get rid of it. Now, when I look at that idea of a shared use between both data plane and the control plane, well, that means a few things. What it means is I have to have this. This has to be there. I cannot have a private-only deployment. I have to allow traffic from Gateway Manager, i.e., to enable the control plane. But it also means things within this subnet, i.e. app gateway, has to be able to have certain amounts of outbound traffic to the internet, because this control plane, that gateway manager, is fundamentally a set of IP addresses from a public prefix. And so what I couldn't do as part of my configuration, I can't block all outbound to the internet. So if I wanted to make it completely inbound and not allow any internet access, I can't do that. I also can't override the default route to the internet, which is that 0000/0, because I'd be messing potentially with the ability for App Gateway to go and talk to the control plane. I also had certain things that had to use Azure DNS, because again, it had to be able to resolve certain things. So it would use that 168.63.129.16, the Azure DNS IP addresses, things like azure.net, other things, it would have to use that. So I had a certain amount of restrictions in play because of the fact the Azure control plane is using the same endpoint as regular client data plane traffic, which then impose certain restrictions. Obviously, I have to have the public IP. That public IP has to allow traffic from the control plane, specifically the gateway manager, and then I can't block access to all internet. I can't reroute everything to the internet. I have to make sure I resolve certain things a certain way. So now what we have for the V2 is a new network isolated architecture. And what this is doing is it's going to now separate the client data plane traffic, i.e., if we look at this picture, what's normally happening is I have my client traffic, and that's going this way. Obviously, if it was in a private network, it could talk to the private IP if there is one. But again, it was shared with the Azure control plane. This is going to separate that. So now the client traffic is going one way, but the Azure control plane, well, that's going to go a different way. And by doing that, it's going to remove all of those various requirements we talked about that imposed itself on the use of this public IP and the way traffic could route and not route. This is a GA capability. So it's generally available, it's fully supported, but I have to opt into the functionality. There's a switch I have to do. So if we jump over to the portal super quick, if I go and look at my subscription, and this is standard subscriptions, how we use features, but we're used to the idea of seeing this. We have this preview features. So the naming is unfortunate here. And I would search for network ISO. And here it is. Enable application gateway network isolation. You can see I have registered for it. Now, If you haven't, you would just select it and then go ahead and hit register. But I also want you to notice I can also unregister it. I can turn off this flag. Now, this is absolutely in GA. If we look at the documentation, it even calls out this functionality of new controls of private IP front-end configuration and other stuff is generally available and supported in production. So the flag is under preview, unfortunately, because that's how they sort of do the flags, but it is not a preview feature. It is generally available. You can go and use it in production very, very happily. There is no issue with doing that whatsoever. So what is actually happening here? So I want to really dive into this. So I'm going to think about an aspect down the side here of time. So we're going to have time. And the time is going up. So we're increasing in time. So I've already got app gateway deployments. So these were created before this flag existed. And so this is their architecture. Their architecture is the control plane communicates with the gateway via the public IP. Now, time has progressed. And so what I'm now going to do is on my subscription, I'm turning on network isolation. So I've turned this on. This has no change to the instances that existed already. So this one, zero changes to it at all. It still requires the public IP. It still has these restrictions on it. Setting this flag doesn't change anything about existing ones. Once I've set the flag, what's now going to happen is for new instances, they're going to exhibit and use the new architecture. Now, the reason they've done it this way is because there are currently a few things not yet implemented when I use the new architecture. So there might be a scenario that's actually, hey, look, I need to go and use this architecture, in which case I would unregister the flag, create an instance that would use the old architecture, and then I could go and turn the flag back on to use the new architecture. So that's the whole point of all of this thing. So the reason for the flag is because I maybe want to be able to control, am I or am I not using the new architecture? So the whole point is, what is the setting of the flag at the time I create a new deployment? That is everything here. So I can think about with the network isolation set, it's now going to use the new architecture. So now what's going to happen is I've configured this, and now I'm going to go ahead and do a new deployment. Again, that existing one I had, nothing is going to change. My brand new one is going to look very, very similar. Hey, look, I've got my app gateway deployed. That app gateway, once again, is going to live within its own subnet within a certain virtual network. But now I've set this flag, it's using a new architecture. And if we look at the experience of creating a new one, we'll start to see some of that change. So I have that flag set. Now we're going to jump over and look at our app gateways. We're going to create a new one. I have to fill in a few very basic fields just initially. None of this actually matters. I will set a region where I know I have a virtual network with a subnet I can dedicate to this. Give it a silly name. Pick that virtual network. And now for front ends, I have complete choice. I can opt to have public, I can opt to have private, or I can opt to have both. But I can absolutely just do a private deployment. So this is one of the things that happens now I've turned on network isolation. I can now pick what do I want. I absolutely, if I want, can still have a public IP. So there's the public IP. But it's optional. I can opt to have a private IP. Optional. I just have to have one of them, or I could have both of them. But it doesn't care anymore. I don't have to have the public IP. I can just be private. I can just be public. I can have both. The reason for this new flexibility is, remember that Azure control plane, the ARM traffic. The Azure control plane is no longer using that. It now has its own separate path. This is the whole point. When I set this flag and I do a new deployment, the deployment is using the new architecture that does not rely on the client data plane communications for control plane communications. It's separated it out. So now this becomes completely optional. Now, remember there were the other challenges though, right? Because it relied on communication with an internet essential endpoint for control plane activities. I had other restrictions. I had to allow certain traffic. I couldn't block all outbound internet. I couldn't override the default internet route in case it messed around with talking to the control plane. It had to use Azure DNS for certain things. The control plane interaction is now a completely different path, separate from any of the client networking. So I don't require the public IP anymore. It's completely optional. I don't require communication from the internet or that special gateway manager, which means I can block all outbound to the internet if I wanted to. So you don't have to do that, but I can. I could, if I wanted to, override the default internet path because it doesn't matter. I'm not going to break the functionality of Gateway Manager. It will use the VNet's DNS configuration because there's no reliance on talking to things a certain way anymore. All of these things are regardless of if you do or don't have a public IP. So I could still have a public IP if I want it for my app gateway, but I could still, if I wanted to, override the default internet path. I could still always use the virtual network's DNS. I don't have to allow communication from the Azure control plane, that gateway manager. So they are separate things. Turning on network isolation makes the public IP address optional because, and that's the key point, because the control plane doesn't use it anymore. The control plane has its own private path, which then also means even if I do have it, none of those previous restrictions apply. I can block all outbound internet if I wanted to. I can override the default route. It will use the virtual network's DNS. I don't have to allow these special sets of traffic. So this is a key point and benefit. And it's about the fact that I created it after I set this flag. Now, if I went ahead and created this, and then I was like, oh, actually, I want the old architecture, you'll see why in a second, I would just turn the flag off. This one is created. It will carry on working with this architecture. But now if I turn off the network isolation and create another one, it will use this architecture where it has to have a public IP and it has to have the control plane talking via that. So the flag is flipping, the architecture is being used. Now I can still, on this one, if I want to, I can have the web application firewall. It is fully supported. I can use it on this. Another thing it does is actually it sets a tag, enhanced network control to true. It has no functional impact. It's really there so I can look at it and say, oh, this is using the new network isolated mode. I can delete it if I want. I can change it. It changes nothing about the functionality. But again, after creating this, after this flag is set, if I unset it, it does not change the functionality of the deployment. All this flag is really used for is which architecture do I use when I create a new instance. Its value has no impact on existing ones. So, hey, this one is going to work with this architecture. The ones that were created before it was set, we'll use the old architecture. If I unset it and create a new one, well, it would go back to using the old architecture. So this is just used when I'm creating it to decide what is the architecture. Now, the reason I may want to go back to the old architecture is today, I can't create private endpoints with the new architecture. So in the old one, I can go and create a private endpoint into another virtual network to then use it to send traffic into it. Today, I cannot create private endpoints. There isn't private link support. This is a current limitation only. The product teams will lift this in the future. And I suspect once they lift it in the future, this flag will not become required. The only reason I think it's really there today is because this doesn't support private link. And if I have a private link requirement, I would want to turn it off and create one with the old architecture that does have private endpoint support. That's the whole point of this. And so that's it. I really just wanted to go into the fact and be super, super clear. This is a new architecture that separates the client data plane traffic from the Azure control plane traffic. So again, that client traffic can go in that way. It can obviously go and talk to the private IP if it's something that has connectivity to it. But it's completely separate from that of the control plane. And so by breaking that reliance, it removes all of those previous restrictions about having to be able to talk from the control plane, can't block all outbound. So I couldn't make it a true network isolated model. It had to be able to talk to the internet. I couldn't override internet routes. I had to use Azure DNS for certain things. So I set the flag, create a new instance. The flag is controlling which architecture I use. That's all it's doing. Removes all those previous limitations. And so that was it. As always, I hope this was useful. If you do have those requirements that, hey, I want to have a nice network isolated model, and today I don't need private endpoints, hey, set the flag, go and create a new instance, and you're good to go. If you needed private endpoints today until they resolve it, just unset the flag, create a new instance, and it would be using the old architecture. I hope that was useful. Till next video, take care.